You're listening to CKXU 88.3 FM. This is your host, the Egg White. Welcome back to live broadcasting from the University of Lethbridge. You have me for the next hour, so please stay tuned. We have a very, very exciting show today. I'm really excited to announce that we'll be having an interview today with Mr. Mark Benson of Fluoride Free Lethbridge, and you will want to stay tuned for this very important interview because it's about you, Lethbridge, and that's very important, and it's something that I've been talking about on the show for a while, and maybe I've been driving you insane, but I'm not too worried about that because it's important. So with further ado, I'd like to welcome Mark Benson to the show.
Hi, Shanna. Thanks for having me here.
No problem. I'm really excited that you're here. And so, of course, we have a lot of ground to cover as far as fluoride is concerned. So I guess we'll just get started.
Right. Well, you can tell me where you want to start, but I think maybe talking about the history of fluoride in the world and its water fluoridation and where it started in Lethbridge would be a good place to start.
Yep, that would be perfect. So please tell the listeners what you know.
Well, maybe just to start out, we should talk, what everybody already knows is that fluoride is good for your teeth, right?
Oh, right. I forgot.
Right. So, I mean, that's what we've all been told. That's what your dentist tells you. And, we've grown up being told that and believing it. But when you start looking at the evidence available objectively internationally, it turns out that it's entirely the opposite. You see all kinds of papers published on the incidental toxicity, whole body toxicity of fluoride. And you start to try to reconcile the two and say, just wait, is this the same thing that's in our toothpaste and in our water? And it is. If we look at an overview of the world, though, we're a vast minority that actually fluoridates our water here. We're Canada, the U.S., Australia, Ireland, Brazil are really the only countries in the world that fluoridate. And Canada is even only 30% fluoridated. The U.S. is quite a bit higher. If you look at Europe, 98% of Western Europe is unfluoridated. If they ever had fluoride in the water, they took it out. In Holland, they actually have national law against fluoridating the water. So when you start hearing that, you go, what's going on? Why are we so different? Why do we believe so firmly that it's good? So I think we have to start there with the history of it and see where this idea came about that fluoride's actually good for your water, for your teeth. So if you go back to the 1930s, there was increasing fluoride pollution in the environment from the phosphate fertilizer industry, as well as aluminum smelting and the atomic industry, the Manhattan Project. So pressure was being exerted on the U.S. government to soften their stance on fluoride pollution. So finally, in like a really little sly litigation avoidance strategy, those industries and the government in tandem approached the Mellon Institute, which was well known in that era as science for hire. They had been hired to defend lead and tobacco, among other outstanding products. And so they developed this idea that fluoride could have some sort of benefit to your health. So then we see the World War II beginning. German tanks are rolling into Poland, and the U.S. Aluminum and steel factories were gearing up to produce the munitions and the armaments for that conflict. And a researcher at the Mellon Institute, the aforementioned, proposed that America should start considering adding fluoride to their public drinking water. And the way that they came up with this is they had a few baseline studies that they always cite. And this is what we still hear when you talk to even our Lethbridge South Zone public health officers. They'll cite these studies saying how they proved that it rebuilds your enamel on your teeth where you have erosion of it. And it turns out that a lot of these studies, when you dig into them, were, first of all, they were incredibly sloppily done. They weren't done in a scientific protocol at all. And it was all done by industry money. And one of the most often quoted is this town in Texas where the people had these incredibly good teeth. They had no cavities. So they looked at their water supply and they found calcium fluoride in it. And they said, wow, industry jumped on it. They said, wow, this is what we've been looking for, this evidence that fluoride isn't this evil toxin in our environment. It isn't really hurting people. It's actually maybe helping them. We can whitewash this with this idea. And so they just immediately jumped on it and said, look, with some really sketchy evidence that it was the fluoride helping to build the enamel, they said it's the fluoride. And
with ignoring the calcium.
That's right. And so actually in subsequent study of that town, they've reconcluded under proper investigation that it was the calcium and the high phosphorus levels in their soil, both essential to healthy bone and tooth development, that was giving the people their health. And actually the fluoride was like a liability to their health, but because their bodies were functioning healthy, they were able to pitch most of it. Yeah.
Eliminate the fluoride.
Yeah.
That's really interesting. Okay, please continue.
Yeah, so, as we go along, 1945, Grand Rapids was the first city in the world to fluoridate its drinking water, and Brantford, Ontario followed shortly thereafter as the first Canadian city. So we're proud pioneers in the in the world of fluoridation. So if we start to look at it when it happened in Lethbridge, after 45, it was becoming a national trend to look at fluoridation. And in 1952, the Alberta government amended the Public Health Act and dictated that decisions to fluoridate in Alberta were to be made by a local plebiscite. So this is a big change in policy. So the act required a 2/3, now this is something you have to remember, 2/3, 66% majority for it to be put in. So in Lethbridge, when we originally put it in, it was required that 66% of the people would approve of it before it was put in. So Lethbridge started holding plebiscites, and between 1957 and 65, Lethbridge had 3 plebiscites to introduce fluoridation, but they were all soundly defeated. Okay?
Interesting.
So they kept pushing on it. Even though the citizens said no once, they tried again. And the citizens said no twice, they tried again. The citizens said no 3 times, they still kept going. So eventually, they changed the requirement in 1966. And rather than 66%, they changed it to a 50% majority required to introduce fluoridation. So after the bar was lowered, the city of Lethbridge held its 4th plebiscite in 1967, which also rejected fluoride. So they couldn't even get it even though they lowered the bar. Then finally, in conjunction with the 1974 fall municipal election, a slight majority of citizens voted in favor of fluoridation. A mere 50.26% voted for fluoridation, but 2.96% of the ballots were actually listed as rejected. Which, without being conspiratorial, there's a lot of doubt. That is not really a valid victory when you have such a small margin, and the amount of the rejected ballots is more than the amount that passed. And we're looking at 4 previous failures where the citizens soundly said no.
Yeah.
So we have to start wondering what's going on. Why is there such a drive after the people have said no 4 times? How come public health and local government is so insistent on making this happen in our community? So I guess moving on from there, we should look a little bit more at what's fluoride, like what's being put into our water. So that earlier study we talked to you about, or we were talking about with the Texas people, and there's several other studies like that where they were all examining calcium fluoride. And there's a couple of lab tests that say, yeah, okay, calcium fluoride might have some beneficial effects. Sodium fluoride, questionable, perhaps. It's another form of fluoride. But sometime in the meantime, there was a neat little switcheroo that went on in the fluoride industry. And they said, well, fluoride's good for your teeth, and calcium fluoride and sodium fluoride pharmaceutical grade is actually really expensive to provide to municipalities. And in scanning what's available for fluoride, the aluminum smelting, phosphate smelting industries, atomic industries are kicking out a lot of hydrofluorosilicic acid as a waste product. Now, originally, this was all released out of the smokestacks of these smelters and factories. And the surrounding people and environment and the livestock were being devastated by it. Like crippling arthritis-type symptoms, loss of teeth, severe deformation of the teeth, cancer rates skyrocketing. And so the government had to finally take action and force these industries to scrub their smokestacks to remove the hydrofluorosilicic acid that was being released into the environment. So all of a sudden they had this huge quantity of waste product, this toxic waste product that they had to decide how to dispose of. And using conventional hazardous waste disposal technique was extremely expensive to the industry. So enter economics, and they said, wow, we have this fluoride compound that we have to get rid of, and fluoride is actually in great demand to different industries, including the plastics industries, because they need fluoride. It's an essential part of making the plastic. But they can't use the stuff that's being kicked out of these smokestacks because it's a silica compound, and it's really hard to break that bond. So it wasn't useful to industry. So that's where the water fluoridation program was born. So actually what's being put into our water is hydrofluorosilicic acid. It's not the same thing that any study has ever been based on. It's something completely different. There are no studies to date ever by any independent body to examine the efficacy or the safety of this product.
So basically, what's being put into our water then isn't even pharmaceutical grade fluoride or calcium fluoride, which was proven to be the potentially good fluoride for our teeth. But in fact, it's a chemical hazardous byproduct that comes from smokestacks in Florida.
Exactly. At the cost of $100,000 a year to the taxpayers of Lethbridge. So we are paying to dispose of Florida's toxic waste.
Instead of them paying for it themselves.
Yes.
That's problematic, is it not?
It's beyond that. I mean, it's almost beyond belief that this can be happening in our community, but we've seen precedent for this in the past with other pollutants and mercury and other hot button issues like that. So this isn't something new. It hasn't come to our attention for a while.
Right. Okay, well, we're going to go to a song, and we're going to come back, and we're going to continue our discussion on fluoride. This track that we're going to listen to is called Where I Got Lost Here. Where did it go? I've lost my song. We're on the Same Side is the name of the track. And I think that this is kind of an interesting song for this show because it kind of highlights the fact that when it comes to fluoride in our health, we should all be on the same side and not fighting against each other about whether or not we're going to continue with this nasty health issue. And so here's a song called We're on the Same Side from James Gordon's album Coyotes Calling. And this is a very interesting artist who focuses on songs about nature and social justice. And if you've listened to my show in the past, you know this is highly relevant to my show. So please enjoy this track, and we'll continue our conversation right after the break. And thank you for listening, Lethbridge.
Do you like film? The Lethbridge Public Library Theatre Gallery will be hosting the Lethbridge International Film Festival from March 18th to March 23rd. From Monday to Friday, showtime begins at 7 o'clock p.m., and a Saturday matinee will be held from 2 to 4 p.m. Admissions are free, and donations are welcome. A new film is presented each night. If you would like to see summaries on films presented during the festival, they can be found on lethlib.ca.
Thank you for listening to that creepy promo about the Lethbridge Film Festival, which looks very awesome. So don't, it's not creepy. I'm just teasing. Okay, anyway, back to our really awesome interview. So just in case you're just tuning in right now and you haven't been listening, we're interviewing on the Egg White Hour our lovely interviewee, Mark Benson from Fluoride Free Lethbridge, and we're talking about fluoride, and we've kind of just covered the history of fluoride, how it managed to get into the Lethbridge water system, and kind of the background of the industry. And so we were just going to continue talking about some more of the industrial information and the background of the health effects of fluoride.
Right. Yeah. Again, like we were saying before the break, this is hard to believe when you first come into this information that this really could be true. And I know that's what's been the turnaround point for a lot of like highly respected scientists and dentists and other authorities that have finally looked at the objective information and said, my goodness, how could we have been doing all these years? There's a retired U of C professor, Dr. Beck, who's one of the authors of the case against fluoride. It's a really good book if you're interested in getting some real detail on the issue. And he was approached by an activist who just kept on saying, look, you got to look at this. And so one day he looked at it and he says, my goodness, what? This is contrary to everything I was taught in medical school. Dr. Hardy Lineback from the University of Toronto, he's the head of preventative dentistry, was a fluoride promoter for his entire career until one day he finally took the time to do a search on the objective evidence of fluoridation, and he found it to be to be shocking. He was flabbergasted. So the further he looked, the more sound he realized it was, and he had to reverse his career-long position. And now he's one of the strongest advocates against it. So, you know, I guess at the basis of it is like fluoride. I mean, there's all the controversy over it. There's controversy over the science. Is it effective? What ways can we measure that? How can we approach that? Right here in Canada, we have a really good example of a good measure of it. Toronto has fluoridated their water for about 4 decades now. Vancouver has never fluoridated their water. They're one of the cities that chose to keep it out. But when we compare the cavity rates of Toronto and Vancouver, it turns out that Vancouver is the same or less cavity rates than Toronto. And there's a whole number of studies internationally that show the same result, that non-fluoridated countries actually have as good as or better teeth. At the same time, they have a lot lower rates of chronic illness. Things like bone cancer, thyroid-related disorders, arthritis, pineal gland disorders, all things that are associated with fluoride levels in the body. Less than 4% of British Columbia's population is fluoridated, but their cavity rates are lower than provinces with high rates of fluoridation like Alberta, Manitoba, and Ontario. 97% of Western Europe, as I mentioned before, drinks unfluoridated water, but their cavity rates have fallen at equal or greater rates than those in fluoridated countries. At least 9 Western European countries, including Denmark, Germany, England, Netherlands, Switzerland, and Belgium, have lower cavity rates than the US or Canada. And actually, if you look at Uganda, they have one of the lowest cavity rates in the world. And they don't have a dentist hardly in the country. They don't have toothbrushes. They don't have fluoridated toothpaste, and they certainly don't have fluoridated water. And the reason that they have good teeth is because of diet. Yeah. They're not eating processed foods.
They're eating real food that's high in calcium.
Right.
And I think for a lot of people, that's the thing. Is like they don't recognize that it's not the fluoride that's good for your teeth. It's the calcium. And I think a lot of the issue around this problem is that people are scared of what would happen if they decided to think about it the other way.
Right.
So, right. And I think you mentioned to me a couple of weeks ago that the reason that fluoride is bad for your teeth and bones is because it displaces calcium.
Right.
So not only are you doing something that's toxic to your body and isn't actually helping your bones and teeth, but you're doing something to your body that is removing the good calcium that you need.
Yes. And I mean, it's a little bit more complicated than even that. It turns out that you need certain trace minerals like boron and selenium and iodine. And it has to be in the right isotope of that too in your body, which is something that's overlooked a lot of times in the supplement industry, is that there's different isotopes of the same element. But if you have that in your body, then your body's better able to shed fluoride when it encounters it. And that's really what your body desires to do. There's no proven like biological function for fluoride in the body ever in any published study ever, any time. Right. Yet it's a cornerstone of our public health policy, at least here in Lethbridge. You know, we've seen this turned over very recently in Calgary, Okotoks, Taber, Raymond years ago. Across Canada, it's spreading. Windsor just got it out of the water. Across the world, it's spreading. Australia's in a major move to get rid of it. Ireland, the last fluoridated country in Western Europe, is on the way out. They're trying to get rid of it there, and they're having great success. So, you know, why? I think it's Cardston and Lethbridge are the last standing pillars of fluoridation, archaic science here in southern Alberta, and so it's time that it changes. That's why we're here talking today. You know, so there's all kinds of evidence to prove that fluoride's not even effective, and certainly not effective in the way that the public health wants us to believe. And you know, I'm not public health authorities. I'm not faulting them personally as much as generally. I think personally they do have responsibility, and they ought to be assuming that responsibility. And I'm quite angered by that, and I've expressed that in an editorial column to the paper recently. But you know, they're provided with data that they think is reliable from somewhere further up in the food chain, and nobody's taking the time to objectively look at this. Now, maybe it's ignorance, maybe there's vested interest, maybe there's lobby pressure. These are all things that we know that influence that public policy platform. But let's move on to talking about the safety of fluoride. So it's not even effective, but how safe is it? That's what you're leading into there with the calcium displacement, which leads to all kinds of problems in your body. But it goes further than that, because the toxicity levels of it is like it's out of this world. I mean, Health Canada and Transport Canada both consider it a bioaccumulative toxin. until recently, the Canadian Pediatric Society recommended that using unfluoridated water for mixing infant formula was paramount. You could not give an infant under 6 months of age fluoride because they knew that it had like serious health impacts.
And when, like, to be a parent in Lethbridge and to know that you can't use tap water
Right.
for young children,
Right.
that's kind of a scary issue.
Well,
To me, like, I'm not a parent, but like, I feel for parents in Lethbridge
exactly.
who have to figure out how to get around that.
Well, and the irony is that the Public Health Authority repeatedly states that fluoridation is for the benefit of low-income families. Yet it's the low-income families that suffer most because, first, the diet doesn't tend to be as good, so that means less trace minerals, so that means less capacity to remove fluoride from the body. So there's more calcium displacement, there's more harm done to the body. Secondly, they're the ones that can't afford their own water filtration system or an alternative, so they're the ones that end up using tap water to mix infant formula or for other uses with their children, cooking, and they're the ones that are impacted most by it. But the Canadian Pediatric Society was taking the stance directly opposed to Health Canada's stance, and finally they had to succumb to pressure, and they changed their policy just recently to erase that from their recommendations. So in some cities in the U.S., the way that they handled it was that even if they continued to fluoridate, they had to list it on the water bill. They had to list all the health precautions to go along with fluoridated water. Well, there's nothing like that happening in Lethbridge. The city of Lethbridge is being highly irresponsible, and I would suggest even they're legally liable for the damage being done to citizens. It's just nobody's aware of it to be able to take them to task on it. But it ought to be on the water bill. It ought to say you should not be using this for children under 6 months age. You should limit it for this person at this age and give the guidelines.
Yeah.
If you do a calculation, though, at current fluoridation levels in Lethbridge, and that's trusting that their measurements and concentrations are accurate, which is another issue we'll discuss later, because there's no real way to control the amount that somebody actually gets in a day. It's a drug. Do you know of any other drug where your doctor says, look, I've never met you, but take this drug for the rest of your life, and you can take as much as you want. Doesn't matter whether you're male, female, large or small.
What other medications you're taking, what your medical history is, any of those issues.
Zero.
Whether you even want to be using fluoride.
Exactly. Which that's really the essence. Which I think that's the conclusion that we wanted to talk about today. But it's the fundamental right of choice. It's informed consent. It's a modern medical ethic. You have to be informed of the medication, its potential side effects, and you have to give your permission. You have to give your consent to be medicated. Public health is mandating mass medication of us. Now that sounds radical, but it isn't. Fluoride is classified as a drug.
Mm-hmm. It's not classified as a nutrient.
No.
Well,
it depends on who you talk to. Health Canada is getting around it that way, but they're in conflict with some of their own regulatory bodies by doing that.
Right.
But if you calculate the amount right now that's in Lethbridge tap water, an average infant that's drinking an average amount of formula will be getting 300% more than the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency's safe dosage based on body weight. And that doesn't allow any consideration for the greater degree of vulnerability of a baby's body. They're developing endocrine and immune systems. It makes no allowance for their increased vulnerability, but even at adult rates, if you take it on a body weight dosage rate, they're receiving 300% more than safe allowance. And our medical officer, Dr. Bennett, recently in a radio interview, 95.5, stated that you could safely drink 10 to 14 times as much fluoride, and I think it was a figure somewhere in that range, and you would still be okay. That's grossly ignorant and irresponsible.
Even though fluoridated toothpaste recommends that if a child swallows a pea-sized amount of fluoridated toothpaste, that you should immediately contact your doctor.
Well, that's actually in the U.S. They have the Poison Control Center label. In Canada, for some reason, we don't have it. I guess fluoridated toothpaste, when it crosses the border from the U.S., automatically becomes safe. Something that they consider toxic there is suddenly not toxic when it enters Canada just by magic of crossing the 49th parallel.
Right. That totally makes sense to me.
Yeah. So again, I have to emphasize there's never been a study done on the safety or efficacy of hydrofluorosilicic acid by any health agency, not Health Canada, not the FDA, not the Canadian Dental Association, not the Canadian Medical Association, yet they all promote water fluoridation. They're relying on industry data.
From 40 years ago.
From 40 years ago. This is like when they said mercury and thalidomide were your friends, You should spray DDT on your kid's head for lice. You can control flies in your house with DDT, and DDT is good for me. The pitch that they use to market it. This is out of the same era of science, the same relic, same archaic industry
funded studies.
Yeah, that's telling us that fluoride is good, and there's been no re-questioning it. Yet our medical officer repeatedly in public is stating confidently and arrogantly that she has studies on her side. We're saying, show us the studies. We have yet to see them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
that's exactly it. Well, and I think that you're right. Like what we were getting onto that topic there, like what it really comes down to is if there was only one person in Lethbridge who didn't want to be drinking fluoridated water, that would be reason enough for there not to be fluoride in the water. Because it is a medical ethical issue.
Exactly, and that's a bit of the frustrating issue that we're facing as Fluoride Free Lethbridge and approaching City Council, is they say, well, we have to see that you have like a large number of people or the majority of people supporting you before we can make a move. That's basically what Council's trying to monitor. At the same time, as an ethical issue, if 1% or even 0.01% of Lethbridge's population said, I don't want to be medicated, we have no right to force it. If we put this into like another example, if we make another analogy, like low-income families in Lethbridge may not be able to afford birth control medication, so we should mandate immediately that we put birth control medication into Lethbridge City Water. And anybody that doesn't want that, if they want to have children, if they're men, or they think that that's bad for the environment or themselves, they should filter it out with their own private filtration unit, which you can do. Our reverse osmosis unit will take out birth control medication, no problem. This is for the benefit of low-income families, and this way it's something that taxpayers should support. If we propose that, can you imagine the
outrage?
Outrage. What about the river? What about all the impacts on wildlife? What about all the impacts on everybody's health? Higher estrogen levels. Just wait. This is exactly the same issue that we're facing with fluoride. Fluoride not only harms our human health, it harms the environment. It harms. It's costing us $100,000 a year in taxpayer money or more. It's a lead scavenger when it runs through the city pipes, so you have increased levels of lead. It leaches the lead out of solder in older houses. It leaches asbestos out of the existing asbestos pipes. There's still some in Lethbridge, to my understanding, and so that's one of the reasons why you see these marked increases in cancer rates. Like dramatic spikes in cancer rates in fluoridated cities. It's because it's not just the fluoride. It's what's in the fluoride. Hydrofluorosilicic acid brings with it, because it is scrubbed out of a smokestack. It has no filtration. It has no purity. It has varying levels of heavy metals, mercury, arsenic, cadmium. It contains radioactive isotopes of several different radioactive substances. This is nasty stuff.
Yeah.
When they brought it, they had a spill at the Lethbridge municipal water treatment plant several years ago. And they accidentally spilled a little bit of this substance on the ground outside of the plant while filling the tank that gets metered into your drinking water. They had to call a hazmat response team in. They had to excavate the entire area, place that soil into special drums, and ship it to Swan Hills for hazardous waste disposal at a great cost to the taxpayers of Lethbridge. And this is what's being metered somewhat questionably accurately into our water.
Yeah, that's exactly it too, is just to know that a substance is toxic to human health and to still continually add it to our water system.
Exactly.
It doesn't actually make any sense whatsoever.
Exactly. It's, and there's such a list of things that we know that it's related to. People with kidney dysfunction, like that are on dialysis, there's been several famous incidents where if a nurse accidentally uses tap water instead of distilled water for the dialysis, that patient dies.
Yeah, that's a scary thing to think about.
That's the extent of how the fluoride's impact on your body if you weren't being protected by your kidney.
Yeah, because you're right. The kidney is the body's protection against those kinds of problems.
Right. All that's standing between you and death in the city of Lethbridge is your kidney.
I'm glad my kidney works. So we're going to play a track from a group called Indian Handicrafts. This album is called Civil Disobedience for Losers. And this track that we're going to play is called Zombies, and it goes out to all the zombies of Lethbridge who want to continue putting fluoride in the water. And that sounds mean, but it's true. You're going to be Yeah, I don't know. I don't know where to go with that one. But I know that I'm going to play this track for you, and I hope you enjoy it. And we'll be back in just a couple of minutes to play some more awesome music for you. And thank you so much for listening. Hello, listeners. This is your host, the Egg White. You are listening to CKXU 88.3 FM. If you can't listen on the radio, you can listen online, ckxu.com. There's a little link there. It says listen live. And you can listen online, which I do at home all the time because I don't have a radio out in Coaldale that can pick the station up. So I know it works. So welcome back to this interview today on Friday, March 22nd with Mark Benson from Fluoride Free Lethbridge. And thank you so much for being here. It's been a really good interview so far. We've covered a lot of ground on the history of fluoride, the issues surrounding fluoride, and those kinds of things. And so we were just going to get into kind of the health effects of fluoride. Right. So please tell me all about it.
Well, I think we were just, before the break there, we were talking a little bit about why it's so toxic. So maybe just to recap that, and then it's a little bit easier to see why the health effects associated with fluoride are such. This chemical being added to our water, hydrofluorosilicic acid, is so toxic that, like a hazmat team has to be called in to clean up spills or to handle it all. It can eat through a half-inch of stainless steel tank in less than 24 hours. It can etch glass. It eats away concrete. It has the highest hazardous materials classification, level 4, possible, and it's a health hazard described as deadly. It's fatal upon short exposure in its concentrated form, and special protective equipment is required to handle it. So as if this isn't enough, this stuff is contaminated with several other poisonous substances, including arsenic, lead, cadmium, radioactive isotopes, all which lead to increased incidence of cancer. So scientists at the American University of Washington, D.C. did a comparison study between hydrofluorosilicic acid and sodium fluoride, and they said this: our focus was on comparing the social costs associated with the difference in numbers of cancer cases arising from arsenic due to the use of hydrofluorosilicic acid as a fluoridating agent versus substitution for pharmaceutical-grade sodium fluoride. The U.S. could save $1 billion to more than $5 billion a year using sodium fluoride of pharmaceutical grade as opposed to hydrofluorosilicic acid, while simultaneously mitigating the pain and suffering of citizens that results from the use of the technical grade of fluoridating agents. So to boil that down a bit, what they were looking at is they were looking at primarily increased cancer rates and treatment costs, and they knew that it's costing them further estimates say it's in excess of $5 billion in healthcare costs due to the use of this chemical. And even if they used its less toxic cousin, they would get that savings. Yeah. If they completely eliminated it, it would be even more dramatic. So what kind of health effects are we talking about? Let's recap that. So these are all health effects that are from published, peer-reviewed studies. And I have to emphasize again that fluoride doesn't have any published, peer-reviewed studies for its safety or efficacy. Any published studies to date have never been peer-reviewed. They've only been industry-funded. And it includes quite a list. Arthritis and joint pain, because often arthritis is misdiagnosed. A stage 2 skeletal fluorosis is often called arthritis, but it really isn't, and it's strongly linked to fluoridation. Bone cancer, cardiovascular disease, dental fluorosis, which some people think is cosmetic. Our chief medical officer recently said it was, but it isn't. It's actually a symptom of systemic damage to your body. What you see on your teeth is what you see on your bones. Diabetes, endocrine dysfunction, gastrointestinal effects, increased hip fractures, lowered IQ in children. There's over 20 studies on that. Increased rates of Down syndrome, pineal gland dysfunction, thyroid disease, and anybody that's experiencing kidney disease has even a higher susceptibility to fluoride toxicity since their bones and tissues accumulate fluoride at levels far higher than healthy individuals. So a study done by Dr. Dean Burke on cancer rates between fluoridating and non-fluoridated settings, and we should emphasize that Dr. Dean Burke was not just a country doctor. He was the head of the American Cancer Institute for a very long time. He did this study where they compared 10 cities that introduced fluoridation as opposed to 10 cities that hadn't, and they measured these spikes in cancer rates in the cities that were fluoridating. He advised against fluoridation. He was basically canned or muzzled for his opinion, even though he was the senior person, the go-to person for the U.S. government at that point on the safety. And that's not something that's that was limited to his era. Currently, the U.S. EPA, Environmental Protection Agency, their own union of scientists and professionals, has officially written a paper against fluoridation. They recommend the removal of it immediately from water everywhere. Yet the EPA is the same institution that's regulating and approving the use of fluoride in the U.S. and subsequently Canada, because Canada follows suit on the EPA's precedent. So we have like the head scientists, like the lead toxicologists, the lead biochemists in the EPA publicly publishing papers opposing fluoridation. And one of them lost his job twice over this, and he had to sue them in the Supreme Court to get it back. And we have the people that are supposed to be safeguarding our health saying, don't do it. But the agency overrides them and says, no, we're going to keep doing this.
That is a very frustrating situation there, isn't it?
Yes.
And we can pretend all we want that, we can be objective about the discussion.
Right.
And I say the same thing. Like, as an interviewer, as somebody who, I have a radio show, I want to remain objective and open-minded about the situation. And yet, I strongly believe that we should remove fluoride from our water.
Right.
So it's a tough situation, because you want to remain objective about it, but how can you remain objective about something where there's no studies that I could quote to try and play devil's advocate?
Right. It's ethics 101. You have the right to informed consent. Everybody has a right. We can't be trampling on that. If fluoride is left in Lethbridge City Water, our rights are stripped. If fluoride is removed, choice is abundant. Rights are abundant. If you really believe in fluoridation, go and buy some Colgate toothpaste. It has lots of fluoride in it. In fact, 3% of a tube of children's Colgate toothpaste is enough to cause acute fluoride toxicity in a child. So there's lots of fluoride in there. If you really believe that poison's good for you, good. But that's your choice. We're asking for choice to be restored to the citizens of Lethbridge. That's our baseline request to the city of Lethbridge, and we need everybody to be aware about this. We need people to be vocal about this. We need people to sign our petition. We need people to get on board with this and let city council know just how wrong this is.
Yep. We're going to take a really quick 30-second break here, but we'll be right back to continue the rest of our discussion on fluoride, because we have some more important things to talk about before we take off. So stay tuned. Oh, this ad doesn't work. That's too bad. I was going to tell you all about Two Guys Pizza. Let me get you a different ad ready, because my ad is not working the way I want it to, and that sucks. So,
well, in the meantime, I can tell you a little bit more. I mean,
please do.
While you're getting that up, it's, so we have the health effects of it. We have the ethical issue of it. Now we can talk a little bit about the environmental issue of it. So not only is this bad for us, 99% of Lethbridge municipal water isn't even consumed by us. Most of it goes to wash water, irrigation water. So 99% of that's going directly into the Old Man River.
Yeah.
So right after the break, I think we can get into that a bit.
Yeah. While we're playing this 30-second commercial break, I want you to think about where your water actually goes when you're not actually drinking it. And this ad doesn't work either. Okay, ladies and gents, I am going to play you a different ad.
Take a look at this sweet baby.
Yeah, but what is it?
For kids. But hula hoops aren't just for kids. They're a tool used to balance the body, mind, and spirit. These Hips Hoops serving Lethbridge and area for custom hoops and lessons. Contact Megan at 403-524-3703 or check out the Facebook page at www.facebook.com/thesehipshoop. Discover yourself through hoop dance, bringing fitness, dance, confidence, and creative expression.
Okay, so I'm sure you've been thinking, like I asked you to, about where all your water actually goes. That's what we're going to get into right now. So,
all right, so the substance that's being added to water, again, is hydrofluorosilicic acid scrubbed from the smokestacks of a phosphate fertilizer plant in Florida, shipped to Lethbridge at the cost of over $100,000 a year to Lethbridge taxpayers. Looking at this chemical a little bit closer, it's known to be contaminated with inorganic silicylfluoride, arsenic, lead, mercury, cadmium, and radionuclides. It's known to leach lead from lead pipes, lead-based solders, lead-based brass fittings, and it's still found in our water distribution today. So it's classified as a persistent bioaccumulative toxin by the Canadian Environmental Protection Act, classified as a hazardous substance by Environment Canada, classified as a dangerous good by Transport Canada, classified as a Class 1 waste by the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. So we have to ask, does the Canadian government not see the inconsistency? On one hand, it asks industry to reduce fluoride emissions, and on the other hand, Health Canada encourages us to use it in our water and drink it?
And that's one thing to go back to, is you said it's a persistent bioaccumulative toxin.
Exactly.
Now, persistent bioaccumulative toxin means basically, it's persistent, so it sticks around.
Very hard to get out of your body. 20 years. 20 years to get it out of your bone.
Exactly. And then bioaccumulative. So that means that it increases as it goes up the food chain.
That's right. And it means that it accumulates over time in your body. So if it takes 20 years to eliminate it from your body, you're accumulating up to that point that it's finally released from your body.
Yeah. So
yeah. So